Sometimes the most unexpected moments bring two strangers together in ways they could never imagine. Picture this, a crowded cafe on a rainy evening, the air thick with tension. A waitress, working tirelessly, suddenly spots the one person she never wanted to see again, her ex, storming toward her with anger in his eyes. Panic sets in. Her heart races. She looks around for help, for safety, for a way out. Then, in a split-second decision, she rushes toward a corner table, where a powerful billionaire CEO sits quietly, reading his phone. Without a word, she sits on his lap, trembling, and whispers, "Please, just play along." For a brief moment, time stops. The billionaire looks at her, stunned. Then, seeing the fear in her eyes, he leans in and whispers softly, "Play along. I'll protect you." What follows is not just an act, but the beginning of an extraordinary story, one that blurs the line between protection and affection, between a lie and something real. Sometimes protection begins as an act, but becomes something deeper. In that cafe, everything happened in a blur. The billionaire hadn't expected his quiet evening to take such a turn. He had come there to escape the noise of his business world, the endless meetings, the ruthless negotiations, the constant pressure of being in control. For once, he wanted peace, anonymity, a few moments where he wasn't the CEO everyone feared or admired. He had chosen that small cafe for its simplicity, unaware that fate was about to serve him something far more complicated than coffee. When the waitress suddenly appeared before him, eyes wide with panic, her breath shallow, he didn't have time to think. Before he could even ask what was wrong, she sat on his lap, her hands trembling slightly as she whispered, "Please just play along." It was a strange request, one that could have startled anyone. But something in her voice, a mixture of desperation and trust, made him react instinctively. He could feel her fear, the kind that came not from inconvenience but from something real, something painful. Without hesitation, he adjusted his composure, wrapping his arm gently around her waist, playing the role she had thrust upon him. When her ex approached, his posture changed. He went from being a quiet observer to someone exuding calm authority. The ex glared, his voice low and aggressive, demanding answers. But the billionaire's gaze was steady, unwavering, a silent warning that this woman wasn't alone anymore. His presence, his confidence, was enough to make the intruder hesitate. Within moments, the tension eased and the ex backed away, defeated not by force, but by the quiet dominance of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command respect. When the danger passed, the waitress slowly lifted her head. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes glistening with both relief and embarrassment. She began to apologize, words tumbling out as she tried to explain herself. She didn't mean to involve him, she said. She just didn't know what else to do. But he stopped her mid-sentence, his tone calm yet firm. "It's all right," he said, his eyes softer now. "You did what you had to." In that brief exchange, something unspoken passed between them, a connection neither of them could name yet. He found himself thinking about her even after she returned to work. The way she carried herself, despite her fear, revealed strength. She didn't ask for pity, only safety, and that intrigued him. For a man who spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, her honesty felt rare. She hadn't known who he was when she sat on his lap. She hadn't cared about his status, his money, or his name. All she had seen was someone who might protect her, and that's simple. Genuine trust unsettled him in ways he didn't understand. Over the next few days, he returned to that cafe, each time telling himself it was just coincidence. But deep down, he knew he was drawn back for a reason. She always greeted him with the same shy smile, sometimes avoiding eye contact, still embarrassed about that first encounter. Yet every time they spoke, something in the air shifted, a quiet warmth growing between them. He found himself listening to her stories, her laughter, the way she spoke about her dreams with modesty but conviction. There was no pretense in her, no hidden agenda. And for someone who lived in a world built on strategy and power, that kind of honesty was disarming. He began noticing things about her that others might overlook. The way she treated every customer with kindness, no matter how rude they were. The way she carried on working even when exhaustion showed in her eyes. She wasn't fragile, even though she had been frightened that day. She was resilient, someone who faced life head-on despite its harshness. The billionaire, who had always seen vulnerability as a flaw, started to see it differently through her. Vulnerability, he realized, wasn't weakness. It was courage disguised as tenderness, The act that started as protection began to linger in his thoughts long after it ended. He started feeling protective even when there was no danger. He would glance toward the door whenever someone new walked in, an instinct he couldn't explain. He noticed how his pulse quickened when she smiled, how her laughter lightened the heaviness he carried inside. He had protected her once, but now he found himself wanting to protect her from everything, even from the loneliness he sometimes saw in her eyes. One evening, as the cafe was closing, he stayed behind, offering to help her clean up. She laughed softly, teasing him for not knowing how to stack chairs properly. That laugh stayed with him long after he left. He realized then that the sense of peace he had been seeking wasn't found in luxury or solitude. It was in moments like these, simple and human. The act of protection had turned into something far more personal. It wasn't about shielding her from the world anymore. It was about wanting to be part of her world. He thought back to that night, the fear in her eyes, the trust in her voice, the way she had instinctively run to him. That memory, once chaotic, now felt precious. It was the moment their lives had collided in chaos but connected in truth. For her, it had been an act of survival. For him, it had become a revelation. She had reminded him what it meant to care without condition, to act without motive. What had started as a performance, a simple gesture of protection, had slowly evolved into something deeper, something neither of them could deny. He had pretended to be her protector once, but now he realized that she had protected him in her own way, protected him from the emptiness of his own isolation. Her presence grounded him, reminded him that beneath his success he was still human, still capable of feeling something pure. As days turned into weeks, the distance between them grew smaller. Every shared glance, every brief conversation carried a warmth that words couldn't describe. He stopped seeing her as the woman he helped that night and started seeing her as someone who brought meaning back into his life. What began as an impulsive act in a crowded cafe had unfolded into a bond built on sincerity and quiet affection. Protection had merely been the beginning. What came after was something he never expected, something far more profound, something he could no longer ignore. Fate often disguises love in the moments we fear the most. That night in the cafe was one of those moments where chaos met destiny and fear unknowingly paved the way for connection. For the waitress, the day had started like any other. She served tables, smiled politely, hid her exhaustion behind routine gestures. The clinking of cups, the hum of conversations, the faint music playing in the background, everything felt ordinary until the past she thought she had escaped walked through the door. One glimpse of her ex, and every suppressed memory came rushing back. The anger in his eyes, the weight of his presence, the familiar tension that once made her feel small, it all returned in a heartbeat. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down a tray, her pulse racing. She needed a way out, something to keep him from reaching her. In that split second, her gaze caught a man sitting quietly in the corner. A stranger with an air of calm authority, dressed impeccably, someone who clearly didn't belong to the noise of this small cafe. She didn't know who he was, didn't care what his story might be. All she saw was safety. Without thinking, guided purely by instinct, she walked toward him. And before logic could intervene, she sat on his lap, whispered urgently, "Please, just play along." It was reckless, unplanned, absurd even. But fear doesn't wait for reason. It acts on survival. The billionaire had been lost in thought, staring at his phone when she appeared. For a moment, time froze. Her closeness startled him, the warmth of her trembling hands, the sound of her uneven breathing. His first reaction wasn't anger or confusion, but curiosity. Why did she look so terrified? When she whispered those words, his response came naturally. He placed his arm around her, leaned in, and said softly, "Play along. I'll protect you." He didn't know why he said it. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe something in her eyes stirred a part of him that had long been dormant. The confrontation that followed was brief, but intense. Her ex demanded answers, trying to assert dominance, but the billionaire's gaze was enough to silence him. There was something in his tone, calm yet commanding, that made it clear she wasn't alone anymore. That single moment, so chaotic and strange, changed something in both of them. When the danger passed, the tension slowly dissolved. She stood, embarrassed, apologizing in fragments. He simply nodded, watching her retreat to the counter, her hand still shaking slightly as she picked up a tray. For the rest of the evening, he couldn't focus on anything else. Her face, her courage, the sheer vulnerability of that moment, it all played in his mind. He had met countless people in his life, from powerful executives to cunning negotiators, but none had left such an impression. There was something raw about her, something unguarded that his world lacked. She didn't wear masks or play games. She was real, and that realness drew him in. Fate works in strange ways. The next day, he found himself back at the cafe, telling himself it was coincidence. But as soon as he saw her, he knew it wasn't. She greeted him politely, a hint of nervousness in her smile, unsure if he was angry about what happened. But instead of confrontation, he offered her a gentle nod and said, "You handled it well." That simple acknowledgement made her smile genuinely for the first time. From that moment, something unspoken began to form, a connection neither had expected nor understood. The billionaire started visiting more often, each time staying a little longer, finding comfort in the simplicity of her world. She was unlike anyone he knew, grounded, self-reliant, yet filled with quiet strength. She didn't fawn over him or try to impress. She treated him like a person, not a title. He found himself drawn to the way she moved, the way she spoke to customers, the warmth she brought into a place so ordinary. It wasn't love at first sight, but something gentler, slower, something fate was quietly building beneath the surface. For her, his presence became both comfort and confusion. At first, she couldn't understand why a man of his stature would keep coming back. He was clearly someone important. His clothes, his watch, his demeanor said it all. But when he sat down and listened to her, when he smiled at her tired jokes, when he helped her pick up a fallen cup instead of calling someone else to do it, she realized he wasn't there to play the part of a rescuer anymore. He was there because he wanted to be. They began sharing small conversations. He'd ask about her day. She'd tease him for ordering the same coffee every time. Those moments felt light yet meaningful. Slowly, the tension from that first night faded into laughter, into comfort. But beneath it all, there was still a quiet awareness. The kind of awareness that comes when two people know they've crossed paths for a reason neither can yet define. Fate had brought them together through fear, but now it was building something out of trust. Every time their eyes met, there was a silent understanding, a recognition of something fragile but growing. For a man who spent years shielding himself from emotion, she was a reminder that not everything needed control. For a woman who had spent years running from hurt, he was proof that not all strength comes with pain. There were moments when they'd sit in silence, the world outside fading away. The hum of the cafe, the clinking of cups, the quiet murmur of other customers. All of it felt distant compared to the connection forming between them. It was in the small gestures. The way he'd wait until her shift ended just to walk her to the door. The way she'd save his usual seat even when the cafe was full. Neither of them spoke about what was happening, yet both felt it deeply. Fate doesn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it slips quietly into ordinary days. What started as an act of protection in a moment of fear had become something far more profound. The billionaire, who once believed his life was too structured for surprises, now found himself looking forward to them. And the waitress, who had believed she was done trusting anyone, found herself opening up again. In the stillness between glances, in the comfort of shared silence, they both began to understand that sometimes love doesn't come with fireworks or certainty. It arrives disguised as fear, wrapped in chaos, hidden behind instinctive acts of survival. Fate had tested them in fear, only to reveal what their hearts had been missing all along. In the end, this story reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected moments, the ones filled with fear, chaos, and uncertainty, are the ones that lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Fate doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it comes disguised as a storm, testing our courage before revealing its purpose. And in those fleeting moments when two strangers cross paths out of desperation, something greater often takes root: trust, connection, and perhaps even love. Because when fear fades, what's left behind is often the truth our hearts were waiting to find.